religious divisions, so we can maybe talk about that a little bit more today. But one of the things that became very clear is that when we want to empower people who have for some reason been disempowered or excluded as a result of these various characteristics, it really involves cultural change. The annoying thing about culture is that it's deeply rooted and often resists being rooted. But the good thing about it is that it's not hardwired. It is something that is changeable. And the challenge is how to find ways of moving cultures to be able to address these questions of exclusion, disempowerment, those who are not able to play a role in solving the problems of their own society. And so the members of the Club of Madrid, many of whom govern very deeply divided, my own country of Canada, and I'm not going to get into the Canadian situation here this afternoon because we don't have to go off for the weekend together so we can even just talk about the problems. But you know, we're a country with an indigenous population. We're a country founded on two major European colonizers, Britain and France, who have been at each other's throats ever since. We're a country that takes in enormous numbers of immigrants. And so, you know, you want to see a divided society, come to my house. Okay. So we all, in our own ways, have experienced this challenge. And so we decided a number of years ago, because the goal of the Club of Madrid is to promote democracy and democratic values. And our slogan is democracy that delivers. And we thought one of the things that we need to look at, because it's a barrier to moving ahead in all of the changes that we want to make, the social progress that we define, social economic progress that we define in the Millennium Development Goals, is this question of divided societies that have, where they're not shared. And so we came up with this notion of a shared society. A shared society is one, I'll read it so I get it correct, where people share an equal capacity to participate in economic, political, and social opportunities, regardless of their religion, ethnic, or linguistic background, and where, as a consequence, relations between groups are peaceful. All identity groups can have a full role and stake in their wider society, able to contribute to that society and take responsibility for it without having to diminish or deny their other identities. And that's a really tall order. I think Canada comes as close to realizing that as any society, but we still would argue that we have a long way to go in many cases. And it's interesting because new divisions come up. I was in Tunisia a couple of weeks ago, and in meeting with the political leaders there, both opposition and Mr. Ghanouchi, they were talking about how Tunisia is ethnically quite a homogeneous society. That's not one of the issues. But the secular religious, the secular Islamist divide is powerful. So it isn't even a question of Protestants versus Catholics or whatever, or even Sunnis versus Shia. Religious versus secular has now become a driving divide in many societies. So what we did with the Club of Madrid is we got together. The great advantage of the Club of Madrid is its phenomenal convening power. And we drew together some of the best experts in the world, plus the experience of our own members, very diverse in many parts of the world, to try and begin to put together some principles and ultimately a toolkit that political leaders could go to find inspiration and ideas of what has worked in France, what hasn't worked in some places, other societies facing these challenges. Because one of the first things that's important to understand in any society where we're trying to deal with creating a new polity, particularly in the new democracies, divided societies, is that you're not alone. This is not something new. As I say, 90% of the countries in the world are meeting this challenge, and even when they think they aren't meeting that challenge, you turn out to have a division like in Tunisia between secular and Islamists, which creates the same kind of stress, even though it doesn't meet the category that we normally think of as being triggers for divided societies. So we singled out 10 areas that we call the 10 commitments and we've got lots of literature here on the Shared Societies program, but let me just briefly go through them. First of all, the first commitment is to locate responsibility for social cohesion within government structures. This is something that public policy has to address. It's interesting. I started my political career, I think I was only the first woman to be Prime Minister of Canada, but I was the first Prime Minister to have had elected office at all three levels of government. And when I started my political career, I was chair of the school board in the city of Vancouver. And Vancouver, of course, is a big recipient of immigrants. And when I was a child growing up, immigrants would come and they'd learn English on the playground. Now, if we rely on them we want them to learn English on the playground, we'll be deeply disappointed because they're more likely to learn Cantonese or Punjabi or whatever. So it's great that they speak those languages. It's not what their parents think they're learning at school. So you have to put resources in. But also, because of all of the divisions, we had a race relations unit in the school board. This was a natural thing. We put money into it. We did research. In other words, the government has to take responsibility. It requires the allocation of resources to begin to break down barriers that may result from the life in that country or the experience people bring from other countries, because it's very common in countries, immigrant countries like Canada and the United States, for people to take their animosities and bring them to the new country and still be fighting one another in the new country. And so, for example, in Canada, we have a Minister for Native Affairs, a dedicated ministry. In fact, my first portfolio at the national level was Minister of State for Native Affairs and Urban Development. Secondly, you have to create opportunities for all groups to be consulted. We talked yesterday about the notion of empowerment, that it seems like kind of motherhood and apple pie and kind of a cliche. I mean, everybody believes in empowerment. But when you stop and think about it, for a long time, our model of public policy making was that smart people and dedicated bureaucrats at the top figured out the answers to questions and then told everybody else what they were to do. What empowerment means is, no, people take part in finding solutions to problems. And any of you who've ever been politicians, I'm sure everyone used to experience this, that when you actually take the trouble to go out and consult with people, they can keep you from making a lot of really stupid mistakes. But this notion of giving people a chance to participate, both to empower them, but also substantively to find out what kinds of things will work in creating the goals that you want to in your society. Thirdly, you have to monitor structures and policies to ensure that they're supportive of social cohesion. Now again, if you're part of a majority group or a privileged or empowered member of society, you will not see what is excluding others. You have to monitor those structures, and it's very interesting. When I was Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, I convened the first ever national symposium on women, law, and the administration of justice. And a number of judges attended this symposium. And several of them said after, before I came, I thought I was pretty liberal on these issues. But I realized I didn't know anything. Because, when you're lawyers, we're terrible lawyers, they say, well, law is a great wonderful thing, it's kind of pristine and it comes down from on high. It's not. It's fraught. It's full of assumptions, biases, whatever. And for these judges to hear from women how they thought that the legal system didn't work for them was a revelation. So no matter how clever we are, no matter how well-intentioned we are, and no matter how much we get out there to meet with our constituents, and good politicians do that, we never will have all the answers. We have to make sure that we're monitoring structures to make sure that they are actually reflecting that broader reality, that we are not unintentionally building in biases and exclusions in our institutional structures that we create. We have to further ensure that the legal framework protects the rights of the individual. That's kind of a no-brainer. But we need to, and the law is more than just something that protects. The law also teaches. We were talking about this, I think, with Danielle yesterday, that sometimes the law gets out ahead of society. Or when you have things like many of the great United Nations conventions, CEDAW, things like that, when countries sign on to them, their own practice may be far from it, but subscribing to that value sets a goal, and it establishes a norm. It establishes what you're aiming towards. And without that, it can be very difficult. Sometimes things come from up from below, but very often it is the legal framework that sets the ideal, and then society moves towards it in many and sundry ways. You need to deal with economic disadvantages faced by those discriminated against. And again, if you look at, for example, Northern Ireland, it wasn't just a question of Protestants versus Catholics, but there were all sorts of material and economic ways in which the Catholic community in Northern Ireland was discriminated against in terms of jobs and housing and things like that. And that just, reinforces the sense of antagonism and animosity. And so you need to look at those economic disadvantages, because also, when you have deeply entrenched economic disadvantages, that also communicates a value. If a society tolerates that, and makes no effort to rectify those situations, you are in a sense reifying an inferior status for those people who don't have the same opportunities. You need to ensure that the physical environments create opportunities for social interaction. Too often, those who are different are shunted off into a separate silo, into ghettos, into places where they cannot interact with the mainstream. And one of the most effective ways of breaking down prejudice is to create familiarity in people, which is why urban centers are so great. Because I remember when I was a student in London many years ago, I thought to myself, it's impossible to be a freak here. Because however weird or eccentric or odd you are, there's a whole group of people who are just like you. And so what you're just exposed to all sorts of people that you find after a while that it takes a lot to shock you, because you're just faced with lots of different people and different colors and different accents and whatever. And I must say that having grown up in a very cosmopolitan community in Vancouver, I feel I'm enriched by it. But that is why those physical environments that enable interaction and that where there's a policy effort to keep people from being too separated or ghettoized is very important for creating that sense of us that transcends color, accent, religion, or any of the other ways in which people can be divided. Secondly, to develop the education system in ways that demonstrate a commitment to shared societies. That's a no-brainer. Curriculum, how we teach people, the opportunities that people have, openness to meritocracy and application for advancement. All of these things are important to help create a mindset and to enrich the educational opportunities of people by making them diverse. Initiate processes to encourage the creation of a shared vision of the society. It's funny, in Canada, we've gone through a number of efforts to amend our constitution over the last few years, and there's a great deal of, sighing and, yearning to find some way. And public opinion research says that Canadians are passionate about their weak attachment to the state. But the fact of the matter is, there are ways in which we have shared symbols and shared rallying points that help to draw our very diverse population together. And societies need that. You need a shared vision. People need to understand whether it's your Charter of Rights and Freedoms, whether it's a certain history, whether it's a contemporary role that you play in the world. Canadians are very proud of being peacekeepers. That's something that they feel is kind of a Canadian identity, because Lester Pearson established the first, or recommended the first peacekeeping force. Whatever it is, you need to try and create a vision that everyone can share. Promote respect, understanding, and appreciation of diversity, and that comes, in Canada, we're a monarchy. And the reason why you don't have people pushing to be a republic is because we've taken the institution of the monarchy and used it as a way of promoting and demonstrating our diversity. The Queen's powers are exercised by the Governor General at the national level and by lieutenant governors at the provincial level. And those people have tended, for example, the current Governor General of Canada is sort of the first white man who's been there for a while. He was preceded by a black woman, Michelle Jean, wonderful Michael Jean, who was born in Haiti, did a fabulous job as our Governor General. She was preceded by a woman, Adrienne Clarkson, notwithstanding her waspy last name, was born in Hong Kong, a Chinese person. And we've had men, women, we've had First Nations people, we've had people of color. And performing that very distinguished and very important role of Her Majesty's representative makes clear who Canada is, that these are all people who are part of our society. So you find ways of demonstrating that respect, of making it palpable in everything you do. And finally, take steps to reduce tensions and hostility between communities. When irritations start to occur, they need to be addressed. They can't be left to fester. So that's the 10 commitments of the Shared Society program. I won't go into any more detail about it, but simply to say that our goal of the Club of Madrid has been to try to take these ideas, but also to go to different countries and find what are the programs that they've used, what are the policies that they've used, what are the insights they've derived, that others can borrow, adapt, and perhaps share. Because it doesn't happen automatically. One of the most natural things in the world is for us to close ranks, to feel part of our community. and to try and find the balance between a pride in the community that you belong to, the group that you belong to, without making it xenophobic, without making it arrogant, without making it exclusionary. That's a challenge. And we're all human beings. We all have certain kinds of tendencies. And if we understand that this is a human challenge, we can address it and then begin to open the doors for moving forward on our Millennium Development Goals, moving forward for achieving the things that we want to achieve, understanding that we need to tear down the barriers and to create a greater sense of us so that we can begin to address those specific goals that we committed to in the year 2000.
Thank you very much. I think we've really got a lot of inspiration from those 10 commitments. And also I think you put on the table some issues which I hope the next speaker, Ibrahim Rasool, will pick up on. These issues of divided societies, ethnically, racially divided, and also I think the fact that often empowerment does involve contestation and therefore struggle, and it's not always necessarily going to be peaceful, and how do we deal with those kind of